what happened at the rail yard in the past. It's part of the fabric of this community, and we understand that. So there's historical information in there. There's sort of analysis of the current condition of the property. There were a number of sort of reuse scenarios that were sort of talked about in there. People were kind of floating trial balloons just to see what might work. It's a very challenging site. You know, unfortunately, CP Rail really hasn't had a lot of incentive to either improve it or maintain it. They haven't needed it for a long time. It's essentially mothballed. Over time, parts of it began to decay. The roof was beginning to fall in. Some of the walls were beginning to crumble. There was one wall in particular that was within 15 or 20 feet of a rail line that they had taken out of use because of concern that the wall was going to tip over and fall on the tracks or a train or a worker. So, you know, frankly, over the last couple of years, the building has continued to degrade to some extent. CP Rail applied to the city for permits to remove part of the roof, and the city approved those. Part of the reason is because as the roof was coming down on its own, there was a concern that it would pull down or pull in the attached walls. So there was a belief that if the bad portions of the roof were removed, maybe the walls would at least remain, so that was done. They came in shortly after that and got a partial demolition permit to reduce the height of the wall that was near the tracks. So they demolished all of it, probably down to about table height. But they were required to leave the remaining portions and to put caps over the exposed portions of the wall and keep water from infiltrating and continuing to break it up. So I think it's been stabilized to some extent. And part of the reason CP Rail has been willing to do that is they're open to the idea of incorporating the roundhouse, or what's left of it, into some sort of redevelopment of the site if a developer can be found that thinks they can do something with the building. The preservationists have told me that it's lost a lot of its historic integrity as a result of natural decay and some of these partial demolitions. But still there's the hope that because the walls remain, because the shell is there, maybe some future developer can say, yeah, I'd like to incorporate that into what I do on this site. And I'm prepared to spend some money getting it back to the point where it's usable. So as long as some portion of it is standing, that possibility always exists. Back to the redevelopment of the site. Even though the prior RFP process ultimately ended up being unsuccessful, CP Rail has from time to time continued to show an interest in redeveloping the site. And they've talked for a long time about the site right along Central that includes the roundhouse. And if you see maps of the redevelopment site, if you kind of imagine the shape of the state of New Hampshire, it's kind of like that. It's wider on the south end and it kind of narrows up as you go north. And you can see it in some of these drawings. Like this one, for example. There it is, New Hampshire. So there's the roundhouse. This is 18 acres. And all of these studies that were done by the mayor's Great City Design Team were basically looking at that property alone. And as you can see, these designs all incorporate at least portions of the roundhouse. The challenge is finding someone that has the money and the willingness to do these types of things. And today,
site. This isn't just a thing that's contained. It is very deep. We're talking 22 feet, so it's not stub your toe and dig up something necessarily. But just to give you a context of how massive this is, it has gone way down. It'll probably get over to the river, and the river actually goes under the river, supposedly. At least I'm no hydrogeologist, but that's what they tell us. And I think also too to keep in mind that I used to think that a site had to be cleaned up. There is no such thing as cleaned up. It's remediated to a certain level. It's never clean anymore. We've done our damages as a society. That's just the fact we've got to live with. But you know, the quarry was being built and open, and it was still an active remediation site. So sites don't have to be done, quote unquote done, before you can start depending on what you're doing there, before you can start some development, and certainly the planning. And that's why for years we've gotten looked at. The city has heard more nagging from us, rail as well as heard nagging from us. Let's start the planning process now. Not wait till it's done and we're 5 years down the road and say, oh, now we should start thinking about this site. But let's get something lined up now. Obviously, the economy is not working in our favor right now, but you know, we've been at this for 12 years, and the economy ebbs and flows, and we're in a bad time right now. We're not going to stay there. I'm sure we're not going to stay there, but
it could get worse.
It's going real well. and then the review study and the Central Avenue master plan all lay the groundwork for what should happen, and frankly, what should not happen at this site.
I have two questions. The first is, so it's getting cleaned up to a commercial industrial level by state standards? I mean, according to
Right, I think they are using federal.
And then when an actual development proposal comes in, I guess what additional standards might be applied so that this might be a deterrent to people coming in and wanting to do something on the site. Will the city demand more? I'm just curious, like what the
If they were proposing housing, I suppose the state would demand more, but
right.
but right now, if the city doesn't have the right to demand more
Right.
from what they're doing right now, it's all legal, it's all state, and it's federal.
There's
It's
so-
Clean Water Act and federal EPA standards, even though it's the state agency enforcing.
So when this remediation is done, 1 to 2 years from now, and whoever gives a stamp of approval and the operations can conclude in that area, then is it shovel ready? I mean, in that from an environmental standpoint, that's 18 acres, and if so, is there? I mean, I guess I'm wondering, other than the obvious, huge kind of
The state
barrier that the railroad represents, what is the plan or the steps or the priority for, or even a proposal for kind of helping to shepherd economic development along this corridor without putting pressure on our city?
punt to Kelly and Mike.
Yeah, I think the best way to understand it is to look at the other industrial areas in the city and see how they progressed. And so you are in year 12. The Central Riverfront, which was an industrial area down by the depot, now is home to Guthrie and failed. Is 35 years old. We're in year 35 of that development. So if you compared yourself to the Central Riverfront, if you compared Shoreham and Central Riverfront, you would compare favorably. You're probably farther along in terms of remediating properties. And as Gail said, it's a big, long history. The other industrial areas, and we can certainly spend time on this as a group, that Councilman Wright wanted to, would be to compare in timing Shoreham Yards to Creek Valley, which, as you know, is right off 394 next to Bryn Mawr and Harrison, and that's there's been a lot of fussing around that site because that's proposed as a future site for water storage in case there's high-speed rail that comes through the city. That's a site that's very much under careful examination. It is not yet received the kind of attention that Shoreham will in terms of remediating the rubble. So that's going to be a big development project. But Bass Creek Valley would be another model. The other model to look at would be the University Research Park in the southeast Minneapolis industrial area, which, like this one, is moving very slowly. There's just infrastructure and remediation things being done, but properties are changing hands very quickly. The mayor and council have reserved some of these areas, like Shoreham, as employment districts, concerned that if we let market forces go, that housing will very quickly invade these areas, and that's certainly been the history of recent history of the city's industrial areas. They do get invaded quickly by housing because housing commands a higher price per square foot, and so housing developers will be motivated to move into these industrial areas. So I think if you look at any of those areas at present, given the kinds of challenges that have been well described, or very well described, the city probably has less power than ever over these industrial areas because of the strong federal preemption behind the railroads, the strong federal policies on environmental cleanups, the higher authority in those areas, and then a complete lack of leverage because we've been eminent domain has really been removed as a tool for economic development, except for public purpose. And so if we wanted to move, as Councilmember Wright can tell you, if we wanted to move a property from one economic use to another, we can no longer do that under state statute. And that's being discussed in the legislature now because in our blighted areas that has really removed a key tool for the city. But there are other industrial areas of the city. They move along at a rate that some people roll their eyes at, but they took a long time to get there. it took 100 years to get to. They're not going to be turned in 6 years or 4. And the Central Riverfront is a good example of a 35-year really program that has come together in a remarkable way. So happy to present that to this group. If you want to see it, I've got a PowerPoint with 75 slides. They'll put you straight to sleep. That'll be good for Kevin because he's not a morning person. Just sleep right through it. But it's pretty heavy lifting, and you guys are into it. Just one other thing, and then Councilor Wright might have a comment too. One, I would encourage everyone here to understand that developers really like working with Minneapolis neighborhoods. They really do. So, and this has a great reputation as a neighborhood that that promotes development along Central and new housing development. So we like that too. We like working with you and recruiting developers. And so when market opportunity comes along Central, along Shoreham, we have worked with developers. One of whom I was talking to coming through the door this morning about this area. And so if we could work with you in partnership, we'd sure like that.
This is just a kind of random question, but if we were to get a streetcar line on Central and down into downtown and South Minneapolis, would either of the 18-acre sites be a viable site for like a maintenance shop, or is that too small of a site for that type of a use?
Oh, sure.
It's the wrong location, actually.
Yeah,
We've been told
probably would be,
further
but
down.
any of the metropolitan authorities love it when we say we'll reserve you some land for purposes of maintenance, because it usually isn't very popular.
It has been looked at a little bit, and from what I've been told, sort of a spoke and hub system is sort of envisioned, with downtown Minneapolis being the hub. And most people have said if you're going to have maintenance facilities, they want it to be at that central hub location where all the trains come back at the end of the day, instead of having it on the ends of the spokes. But on the surface, it makes sense. I mean, the roundhouse was used for maintaining rail cars, in the past. And it seems like it could be easily converted for maintaining streetcars, but you've got to kind of get over that spoke hub thing. So there's some potential there, but that's an issue.
Well, Northeast should be the hub.
Amy, watch your grammar. Northeast is the hub.
We'll send a spoke down downtown.
Mike,
if they want.
In terms of scale, are these sites big in Minneapolis as open space, development space? I'm not that familiar.
Semi is 500 acres. Semi is 500 acres. This one's 30.
Well, if you look at individually owned sites, I mean, it's hard to find an 18-acre single owner site that may be available for development. So there will be some interest in that. Mike is right, semi and other larger geographic areas have more total development space than this does, but on a single...
So project areas where you're trying to do something over a bunch of properties.
This is actually kind of weird to compare it to semi. I mean, this is Main Street.
Yeah.
Semi is not anything close to a main street or even a community or neighborhood. I'm sorry. This is Main
Would
Street.
that brings up a real...
Can you?
I think that brings up a
Semi
real...
is the.
Industrial.
Is what?
I think some people are unfamiliar with semi.
Between 280 and 260.
But I think that brings up a really good point about this area, and just to draw on the parallel that Director Christensen has evoked in terms of the Central Riverfront. What really made that, there's two real key components, in the big picture for the Central Riverfront, which was a lot of work, and there's still work being done, actually. And I've seen some of those documents. They go back to the 50s, Metro 85, which 69, 70 when it was published, way in the future to 1985.